And one of the things that we've been doing a lot of work to do is to map what do we think are what are the core meta trends that we think are going to drive the recovery and beyond. And then you think forward, it's not that big sort of journey of imagination, then say, okay, if you believe these, what are the sets of jobs and skills that constitute them? Just as an example, with the top one, the readiness economy, Thomas Friedman at the Times puts it well. He says, that COVID-19 wasn't a black swan event, the kind of thing you can't predict, but actually a black elephant event. It was the elephant in the room that we were all ignoring. Well, we're not ignoring that anymore. And so you sort of think about the dollars that are likely to get spent on readiness, both by government and by industry, not only for the next pandemic, but for physical infrastructure collapse, for cyber attack, for environmental catastrophe. That investment will be considerable. And that investment will translate into certain kinds of careers, certain kinds of skills. And if you look out to them, we'll be releasing a report in the next couple of weeks. In fact, actually mapping these economies out, as well as the green economy. You can kind of then say there are certain sets of jobs that are going to be really important. How do we capitalize on that? So just I know I always talk too much, and Joe's being incredibly patient. But I want to just, since we've got some people from south of the river on the call, I would be remiss if I didn't sort of take this beyond the societal and also look at how this creates an imperative for companies, and for what this means for them. This analysis recently did for a large automotive manufacturer, which was looking at mechanical engineers, and you can kind of key to their workforce, right? Traditional mechanical engineers on the left. All you do is introduce certain new technologies into that role, and all of a sudden the entire role changes. Look at how the skills required to be a mechanical engineer working in V2I differ from the traditional, or a mechanical engineer working in autonomous systems. Each of these, none of these looks like one another, and yet they're all called mechanical engineer. So as we start to see jobs absorb new technologies, again, you see fundamental transformations that happen. It also means that keeping up with the Joneses becomes all that more difficult. So here, for example, if you were to look at Volkswagen, right, you would see that their definition of a mechanical engineer includes things like project management and cost analysis and purchasing. And I make no judgments here, but if you look, for example, on the right at Tesla, which is focused on CADIA, which is a simulation software on Python, and electrical design, it's a different job. I'm not an engineer. I've never been one. I don't play one on TV, but if I were playing Wayne Gretzky School of Talent Development here, I'm going to guess the puck may be going toward the right side of the page. And so what does that mean in terms of whether the workforce you have is the workforce you're going to need in the future? This is also, and I'll finish up here, this idea of skill change and of skills being the distance between jobs is also a key to how I think we can actually unlock dramatically greater equity in the years ahead. And that's because I think we've talked a lot here about mobility, and equity really depends upon mobility. A lot of the ways that, and I think there's a lot of companies out there that are pursuing very sincere strategies toward increasing the diversity and inclusiveness of their workforces, but ultimately feel like they're stuck because the only lever they have is hiring, as opposed to moving people ahead. The reality is that most companies actually have some reservoirs of diverse talent, but they're not where they necessarily are looking for them. And so the question is, how do you create escalators of talent? I mean, sort of, if you don't do that, you wind up playing the zero-sum game view, where you say, okay, well, there was recently the CEO of Wells Fargo, some of you may have seen, made, a pretty bad comment about, how, well, there's just not the talent there or whatever. I think most CEOs are more shrewd in terms of their word choice, but unfortunately, many people, I think, not just that CEO, probably think in the same regard. And part of the reason is that they think that they're competing for the same pool of talent. On the other hand, if you work backwards and say, okay, what are adjacent talent pools, and how do I pull people up? How do I create those escalators of talent? Shipping clerk makes $27,000 a year, and 41% of them are people of color. But if you teach that shipping clerk it's Microsoft Excel, she can become an inventory specialist, make an additional $6,000 a year, where only 30% of workers are people of color. Teach her project management and scheduling, and she's an operations coordinator, where only about a little over 20% people of color, and making now $10,000 more than the shipping clerk. So that arc of skills becomes key to being able to do better. It is also key to be able to actually apply a good deal of scrutiny to where diversity is and isn't in the organization. Here's an example from a Fortune 50 prospectus about diversity, which claims 45% of that workforce Black or Hispanic. And our data confirm that when we do our own analysis. But fascinatingly, right, like their data scientists are 2% Black or Hispanic. Their BI architects are 3% Black or Hispanic. So understanding where are the droughts, where are the reservoirs is really important, because otherwise you wind up in this weird terrain of aspirational goals, of which are really important. And right? Like we want all of our talent pools to represent the community we serve. That's good and right and exactly what you should be aiming for. But then at the same side of their mouth, a lot of companies won't say, yeah, but we're tech companies, and we're looking for software development. It's just hard to find. So you kind of write yourself a tall path. And in fact, if you sort of look at Fortune 50 tech companies, a bunch of them at that kind of 4%, 5%, 6% of their software developers being Black or Hispanic. There are other Fortune 50 companies where as many as 28% of their software developers are Black or Hispanic. Same kind of disparities when it comes to women. Same disparities when it comes to locations, right? Amazon was out hunting for HQ too. But if this is a really important priority, Miami's software developers are 55% Black or Hispanic. Atlanta's 31%. Actually, by the way, the gender disparity on the right around financial analysts to me was even more stunning, because there are legitimately differences in terms of the racial composition of cities, which explains some of what you're seeing on the left. But generally, most cities have a kind of 50-50 ratio of male to female. The fact that you can see such disparities, where only 35% of financial analysts in New York are women, as opposed to about half in Detroit, is really interesting. Every company not only has opportunity to draw from a broader pool, has ability to draw from within. Here's a retailer where 21% of their database administrators are Black or Hispanic, but the data engineers only 4%, right? Can you tie to that and create opportunity?